We're recording. All right. It's episode 4 of season 12 of Mentioned in Dispatches, and we've got a motley cast of characters for you tonight. Rocky's back. Rocky, welcome back. Good to see you.
Hello.
And we've got BB Mike back. This is like 3 in a row now, isn't it, Mike?
Yep, I feel like I just left and here I am again.
Yeah, catching up with co-host duties. I feel like I was just listening to you because like I was editing our previous episode earlier today. And first time showing up on one of our broadcasts here with Mentioned in Dispatches, but a longtime member of the community. Byron is here. Byron, most of you will know as Jack Nastyface, floating around our forums. Byron, welcome. Appreciate you being here.
Pleased to meet you. Pleased to be here. Good to see everyone.
Especially because like we're cutting into vacation for you. So
I am skiing in Fernie, BC right now.
Yeah, so we definitely appreciate you taking some time away from the. I mean, it's probably dark on the slopes, and you can't actually.
It is. Yeah.
So that probably helps. All right. So here's the deal. Originally, based on a listener suggestion from last season, we were going to try and talk some about sort of the online variants to different games and some of the homemade mods and scenarios and other things that people put up there. The problem was we were having a hard time finding folks that actually did this a bunch to include any of us. I don't think any of us have done this a whole bunch. But I did see a different inspiration floating around BGG that I wanted to pull up and throw at you guys. And audience, I have not warned these folks what I'm about to do to them. So this is going to be kind of folks sort of grabbing stuff out of thin air and reacting to this. There was a thread on BGG that says you've got $1 million to improve the wargaming hobby.
If I had $1 million, if I had $1 million, a
rich grognardi benefactor has left you his estate estimated at $1 million. The catch is he wanted his fortune to go to the thing he loved, this hobby. This is Andrew Cluck who put this in the BGG forums. You must spend every penny and it could go to, a variety of different things around, expansion edition to the existing war game, brand new war game. So I want to expand it beyond just what Andrew Cluck had said. You've got $1 million to do something cool for the wargaming hobby. What is it you might want to think about trying to do to sort of make the hobby, not necessarily improve the hobby, but in order to give back to or do something cool for the hobby other than just like send everybody a free game. So with that as a starting point and without a whole lot of deep thought into any of it, because this broadcast is 2 minutes and change old at this point, Mike, anything spring to mind just off the initial impression there?
Yes, we've had this discussion before, so this is easy for me. It's not this exact discussion, but we've talked about something similar in the past with War Game Wishes, I think. If I had that kind of money, I've talked about this before. These war games that are out of print, that you can't find anymore, that are just out there, I would create that good old games, for the digital world. I would create that good old games for wargaming so we could get all these out of print games, access to them. You see a game, you go to Good Old Games, War Games, and you find that war game and you hit this buy button and it prints out on one of those fancy Blue Panther-esque magical machines and you receive it within 2 to 3 weeks.
So you're looking at spending that $1 million on kind of getting the rights to those games as well as whatever technical updates need to happen for production purposes.
Yeah, and I'd probably run out of that $1 million pretty quick, huh?
Well, but I think what you'd run out of is the lawyer's fees in trying to clear up where all the rights were with a lot of
exactly. That's what I mean. Exactly.
Because
I'd probably get one game out there. And that would be it.
Yeah. Because the ownership of the rights of some of these things gets a little murky at times. Did the guys sell it to the company that printed it, or, were they on staff and therefore it always belonged to them, or, could they recapture the rights? Who has the rights to the artwork, et cetera, et cetera. So,
yeah, some of that stuff is lost in the murky waters, I think. Now, if I did have any money left over, I would take the money left over and give it to the Amarillo Design Bureau and have them do artwork and update all of their games. So that's what I did with all my leftover money, if I had any.
Bring all of their old Trek licensing into the 21st century, huh?
Update it. Come up with some new stuff.
Byron, initial impression, first guess. You got $1 million to do something cool for the hobby. What do you think you'd do with that?
Well, First thing, I'd hire a project manager at a six-figure salary. That could be me, and then I would start. Then I would start producing alternative counter artwork and matte artwork for some of those. In any game where their community of users would like to see something new and interesting and exciting, be they old or be they new. I really like how, since we're talking about board game or BGG variants, how there was an updated version of Melee, the old Steve Jackson game that has some really nice artwork on it. I'm going to say something that might get me kicked off this call immediately, but I am not a fan of NATO counters. It's not that I don't understand them, but I don't understand them. So I like little pictures of tanks and airplanes, especially airplanes, because I like looking at the airplanes, and pictures of soldiers. So I enjoy that graphic image. Computer graphics is now accessible everywhere. 3D printing is now available readily or very cheap. So what I'd really like to do is have 3 or 4 different kind of flavors, if you will, of artwork for all these games. I'd love to see something by like a World War I game where the characters look like the guys from this God Damn This War by Tignus, who's unfortunately passed, or by the guys who drew the Grizzled, to get stuff like that so that you can see that, whatever game you want, and just go across and choose a selection of games. Because, the counters for Caesar Elise are nice, but, it would be so much better if when I'm looking at that cavalry unit, I wasn't also reminded of the Riders of Rohan from Sauron, from the Siege of Minas Tirith.
Yeah. The some of the Worthington block games, New York 1775, 1776, the New York one, there's like a Saratoga one. There's a couple of them. They do come with 2 different sets of stickers that you can put on the blocks. They've got one that's just the regular old basic symbology, and then they've got one that's slightly snazzier artwork, whether it's crossed rifles or a guy on a horse or whatever. Some of the headgear for some of the leaders. So some of the Worthington games do give you that option between the 2 different kinds of stickers that you can pick and choose which one you prefer to slap on the thing.
Yeah. And I think there's a really interesting opportunity for things like science fiction and fantasy games. And I know this is going to sound really geeky, but, every now and then there'll be a science fiction movie where they have a single artist or maybe a couple artists design all the gear, the clothing for all the alien races that come together, all the fantasy races. And they all use the same sort of thematic elements. But, that's we here on our planet, not science fiction or fantasy, traditional Japanese clothing looks very different than traditional European clothing. So the ability to hire different designers and maybe even, like clothing designers or artists who can design, a space race that no one's ever thought of, it would just add that whole concept of, here's a different group of people or different group of species from another planet who are so totally different than us that they're wearing clothing that we would never think of. And that isn't just a riff on what the Earthlings who are being invaded are wearing, because that's all coming out of the same graphic mind, if you will, and when you use a single designer. Yeah.
There's a couple of fashion shows that you see snippets of on TV that certainly look like some alien race designers were involved in the design of some of those clothes, some of the clothing there. All right. So Rocky, you got an extra 5.5 minutes to think about this ahead of these other guys. What do you think? You got $1 million to do something with. What do you think you might try to consider doing to improve the wargaming hobby?
Well, after buying $1 million worth of games for myself, because that's why I'm supporting all the other publishers and designers out there. Now, I mean, I like BB Mike's, sort of the bring back the past. I like Jack's let's go with alternatives, but I think we always talk about also the graying of the hobby, and the cameras are not going to be turned on for this podcast, so you can't see my gray hair and everybody else's. But we've always talked about how do you support the young designers? How do you support the new blood? How do you support the new players? So the professional wargaming world has looked at it. Was there a pipeline? Is there a syllabus? Is there something you can do to help the new designers learn the trade, or somebody who's interested? So, endowing a scholarship and supporting a an education program. It's more than just saying, hey, we're going to, fund a venture cap. I don't know, even then, maybe venture capital, some war game design and war game publishing pieces. But I think it's awesome to look back at the past. But maybe with this, we could do something and look towards the future. So that way, we're supporting that artist that's going to be doing that snazzy graphics that Jack's talking about. We're going to be supporting a designer that can explore some of those older titles that BB Mike will bring back, so that they can then go off and do the next great thing. So a little bit look forward, maybe. But again, $1 million ain't going to go that far. But you hand it over to some of these small groups, and maybe it will. Every little bit can help.
Why? Are they broken? You're actually stumbling into where I was going to go for my answer, and I was going to take it a little further than you had. Right now, and I know about a bunch of these just from our work with Connections Online, as well as some of the other overlap that I've got with the practitioner world, as it's focused on sort of the practitioner world mainly. But there are a handful of places around the U.S. specifically, although there's ones and twos internationally as well, where there is an occasional game design course. Right, Rex Brynan's got his course up in McGill, where it's that 400 level course that he teaches on, that he talks about through PAX Sims. But it's a serious game design course, but it is a single course. Sebastian's got the class at Georgetown. A lot of folks sort of use the Georgetown University Wargaming Society and that class as interchangeable terms. It's partly Sebastian's own fault because of the way he refers to them. But right now, the support for Goose is one class. In places where you find an actual game design program, we've got two of them here in town with me in Raleigh. One's at William Peace University and one's at the local community college system here at Wake Tech. The simulation and game design programs are less game design than they are game development, right? They're more about game code writing because they're all digitally focused, because they're trying to address the needs of the marketplace. And the Raleigh area here actually happens to be kind of a hotbed of video game design. Epic Games is 6 miles away from me, is their headquarters. For folks that don't know, Epic Games are the Fortnite guys, among many other things. But we've also Ubisoft and NCSoft and a couple of other big studios have had development shops set up here in town. The guys that did the Temple Run mobile game way back when, they're based here in town. So, I mean, we've got a lot of digital game development here in town, but not a lot of tabletop game development. Even up in the upper Midwest, where places like Minneapolis and Madison and Milwaukee have a lot of game design talent, there's not a lot of game design instruction in the universities up there. There are one-off classes here and there. We even had a previous podcast where we brought in Rex, we brought in Sebastian, we brought in Jeff Tidball, who runs Left Justified Studios, previously worked at Atlas Games, has taught a one-off game design class. I was a guest speaker for class Matt Forbeck taught online during the pandemic on game design, but again, a one-off class. I would want to take that $1 million, take a significant chunk of it and endow a chair somewhere for a full professor of tabletop game design, but with the stipulation that it can't be a single course sort of thing, right? We got to bring in some other faculty as a part of that to build a program for tabletop game design that becomes a little more interdisciplinary, right? You're going to need the stats class. You're going to need the graphic design class. Not that you have to become a graphic designer, but you have to understand the principles of it. And you're going to need some history classes that will overlap and probably some current events, poli-sci sociology types of classes to help overlap with this. But to get us beyond just a single course and into an actual program of study that gets you at least a minor in game design, if not an actual degree in game design somehow. And I think that's something, especially wargaming focused, that I think would make a significant difference. The balance of that I would want beyond what was used for for the chair, or for endowing that faculty position, I would want to use the balance of that towards building out and curating a library of war games. Going back, similar to what Mike was saying, not just that you've got the giant Dr. Seuss machine that you can hit print and spit stuff out the other end, but that we can actually develop a library of these things where you can walk in and, I want it to look like Eric Walters' third floor game room, right? Because I've actually been in, not at his current house, but at his previous house, I've been in Walters' game library. Colonel Walters has a fantastic game library, and you walk in there and you just sort of kind of fall to your knees. It's pretty earth shattering. I think that's where I would want the money to go, is beyond just a single course, and let's build out a full program of study. So Rocky, kind of taking your idea and multiplying it a little bit. Byron, I think you were wanting to jump in there with a thought.
No, I was going to make a comment, but you kind of backed into it by talking about the sort of lack of game design classes, and so, and it's an interesting thing. I did an undergrad, or part of my undergrad was in history. One of the courses that was available to us in the history course was a study of propaganda. And one of the things, the school assignments, was to make a propaganda film about whatever topic you wanted.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And I sort of think back on some of the courses I took in my undergrad, and there are so many opportunities in retrospect to have made some kind of, have gamified some of the topic. I mean, as a student project, man. And even as things as what might sound mundane, like I took a course in the opening of the Canadian West, or expansion to the Canadian West. Well, in Canada, we don't have a version of the Oregon Trail, either on a text-based or computer or board game. But there are some incredible stories that could be told through a student group working on things like that. So I'd love to see more exploration of those kinds of ideas in the academic world. Why do I have to write a paper on, whatever the battle of, the streets of Paris, and why can't I create a game on that? Why not Battle of Duck Lake? A dear friend of mine, Mark Wallisham, has a battle on some of the, it was now created a game on the Métis, or the Métis Rebellion, the Louis-Riel Rebellion here in Canada. And it surprised me that it took so long for someone to do some of these things. And I think at an academic level or in the classroom environment, it wouldn't be your whole project. You'd still have to have some footnotes and bibliography references.
Yeah. I think part of that is that there are so few faculty members out there that are equipped to understand how to grade a game like that.
Yeah.
That it becomes very hard to figure out whether or not the game actually adequately expresses the point that the faculty member is trying to get across in any of that. I don't want to turn this entire thing into a giant academic discussion, but Mike, any reactions to any of the ideas that the other three of us threw out here?
Nope, they all sound good to me. Let's go for it.
We just got to find $1 million, right?
If I had $1 million, if I had $1 million.
Exactly.
All right, so let's spend the next 40 minutes trying to figure out how to get $1 million.
You're talking to the wrong guy here. So next.
Yeah.
Well,
doing well.
Rocky mentioned approaching a venture capital agency, but I think the only way to make a small fortune in the wargaming business is start with a large fortune and watch it diminish. So
yeah. Well, unfortunately, venture capital backed game companies aren't always the greatest thing. Witness the meltdown that's happened over at Evil Genius Games over the past 6 months. And perhaps venture capitalism backed game companies aren't necessarily the best way to go, although that could just be the particular personalities involved in that company.
Yeah. Kurt Schilling might have a comment about that as well.
Well, yeah. Well, he's had one incredibly successful one, and then a couple of, sort of wet turds.
Absolutely.
I think we could all agree that M&P are largely more successful than not, whereas the rest of them, now, to my knowledge, none of the other Kurt Schilling backed projects were tabletop companies. I think they were.
That's exactly right. They were all digital. Yeah. They're all digital, but
yeah. What you got, Rocky?
Well, I was just thinking here, going back to it, but BB Mike was talking about some of the older games and bringing them back. And aside from all the legal issues, and the possibility of updating them. Just the historical piece that you were talking about, like the game library, that sort of stuff. Game mechanics have evolved over the times, but in many ways, there's still a lot of first principles in there, and I think a lot of all those early games have a lot of good first principles they can teach. I really sympathize with BB Mike, because sometimes you want to get those old ones out. I got to put some old titles in my collection here, going back in 45 years. And
you wrote about Tactics 2 for us.
Yeah, I mean, and there's some of the fundamentals are in there, and they don't change. You can update them, you can play around with them, but they don't change. But you have to wonder. I really is sort of exciting to take what B Mike does and what Jack's talking about there is like take some of those old games, those original SPI, the original Avalon Hills that literally only had an 8-color palette, because that was literally what the state of the art technology was. And yeah, NATO counters were easy because you could do that DTP, just a couple of boxes and a little things, because it was the printing presses weren't super fancy. So taking some of those old games and bringing them up to date. I grew up with NATO counters, so they don't bother me, but at the same time, you're right, there's something extra immersive about it to get a better piece. And now I don't think that we need to apply the CMON model to everything, but a couple of little pieces. And wood seems to sell, so maybe you spend a little more on some wood and you'll sell more games because people just flock to it because it's got wooden bits. Oh my gosh. So there's a lot to be done there.
Stand-up leader markers from Wilderness War or Liberty or Death. They all seem to be sort of colonial North America that have the stand-up leaders in them. But
there's a lot that can be done. There's a lot more. I mean, even just what to take Jax to the next piece is, you bling out the counters, but there's also, and this may be wrapped around to where we originally were, some of the BGG variants is with a little bit more money that you could invest in some of these productions, you can get further. Even though you pivoted away from it, some of the BGG variants, some of the stuff has turned out well. I look at my the Red Storm air game from GMT. There was all the planes were originally on tables. All the stats are on tables to the side, and somebody on BGG said, "Oh, I can put these on cards." And eventually, that became an official variant. So all these little things that can help us to take the game that one extra level step. Maybe you become there's some of that aftermarket. Maybe that's another option. Think of it as like an aftermarket piece. You're gonna have some folks that are going to be saying, "Oh, you're going after my money." Well, I got $1 million, so I can try to make some money too. I don't have to just spend it. Can't I use it to make some money? So, I mean, bringing back the old games, blinging them out, adding different accessories, even if it's just like a canvas map for a little bit extra. All these little pieces can help bring the market along. Maybe because some companies that had to make some decisions early on to save costs, we can help them out and make some money for ourselves along the way too.
This is when talking about old games. I kind of wish Jim was on and we could ask him his opinion of rebirthing System 7 with more colorful graphic counters.
I remember the first time I saw a war game that wasn't black ink on a different on whatever color background counter. I remember the first time I saw War and Peace with white ink on something. I was floored. I was like, "Oh my God, we can do other than black ink on stuff. That's cool." Because the War and Peace counter palette had white ink on some background colors and had yellow ink on some background colors. So you had both yellow icons and white icons on blue for the French with their the actual French forces versus the French allies. Man, that was cool. Like, whoa, there's different colors. And by the time I got around to seeing like the original victory games, NATO Next War in Europe with, different color backgrounds for the NATO symbols, what sorcery is this? This is that was wild. So yeah, definitely some graphic upgrades would be nice. I wonder if some people wouldn't want just like a mass size upgrade for a whole lot of the games and take all those 1/2-inch counters and blow them up to like 7/16 or bigger, just so that all us old folks could actually read what's on them anymore.
It's funny you say that because I just did an unboxing of World War II campaigns, which was reprint of the old GDW Series 120 games.
Yep.
And I was kind of disappointed, talk about, here's an opportunity to bring back some of these old games. I mean, I won't say they weren't bad games, but they weren't, great games. But there was an opportunity to maybe change the artwork, change the maps, upgrade the counters. And they really didn't do that. But what they did do is they made the 1/2-inch counters, 5/8 inch counters. They made the text in the rule books larger and the maps a little larger and easier to read. So they kind of did that.
They know their audience.
They know their audience, I think.
Remember, this is a company that still has the paper order form on the catalog for you to handwrite your credit card number and mail it to them. So yeah, they know their audience.
They do know their audience.
It's clear. Mike, you're right. This does overlap a little bit with some of the Wargaming Wishes episodes that we've done in the past. Those were just sort of generally aspirational kinds of things, and I think included a bunch of wishes for the audience and each other as well. Whereas, trying to focus this a little bit more towards the hobby as a whole, that $1 million, I would want to definitely go, as I said before, start building some sort of academic home base for Wargaming design and development over time, to kind of give it a little bit more gravitas out there. If I can't find a faculty home or any sort of place of higher education willing to take on this thing, I think I would want to take that $1 million and find as many copy editors and public relations people as I could for all of the major publishers. Because God knows I'm sick of finding typos in rule books. And we got to find somebody that can put out a coherent press release for a company and actually engage in. Basically, I would want to take Danny Lowe, who used to work for Hatchet and Pandasaurus, and I'm not sure where she's working now. I would want to take Danny, and I would want to clone her at least once for every major wargame publisher, because she's really goddamn good at her job, and every wargame publisher needs somebody like her working for them. That's what we need out there. We need a whole lot of Dannys. So, Rocky, you look like you're about to jump through the screen at me.
Copy editors. There's more. Just recently, there's been games out there. There's some threads going around right now about who's got some of the worst written rule books. Who do you go to help you with your rule book? And it's sort of, it's taken some of the big companies now are starting to bring on somebody, copy editor, somebody who's trying to develop and put the pieces together. But you're right. That's a technical writer skill is hard to find to begin with. And then a technical writer that can do war games and war game rules, is not something you train to. It's good. It literally has to be an art that they walk into.
Well, you're taking one step beyond where I was going. I was just thinking copy editing, like typos and punctuation and subject verb agreement. I think you're going a step beyond that to like actual editorial review of, does this make sense and how does it flow and are we doing things in the right order?
There's
words in your mouth, or is that kind of where you were?
No. That's exactly. Whenever I look at rule books, I look at I go back to my example that I strive for that I point to is Root from Leader Games. There's two rule books. One is how to play, and the other one is the laws of Root. One is very conversational, very call it, for lack of a better phrase, Euro game approach, very tabletop board game. The other one is the rules. The law of Root is more almost like your classic war game, case notation and such. But it's a great recognition that how you teach and how you reference the rules are two different ways. And some companies can afford to put the two rule books in there. Some of them don't. I get disappointed these days when people are like, don't even try to do the rule book. They're just like, hey, go to our YouTube and watch this video. Okay. But many times it suffers from the same problems, is because it just doesn't communicate very clearly what the game is, or give you a reference point that you can go back to in the middle of the game and say, what is this? And how did I do that? Where was that found? Just that part of the rule books. You just want to talk about, BB Mike was talking games, or talking, bringing back old games, just to bring in somebody who can write a freaking rule book. That would be nice.
Yeah. Rodney from Watch It Played has stood on a table multiple times on different videos about war game rule books that they suck for learning the game, right? War game rule books are generally a great reference tool for how to play the game, to like look up rule disputes. But in terms of learning how to play the game, war game rule books suck.
Right.
And I think he's more right than wrong.
I disagree. That's not strictly limited to war game rule books. I've played
Well,
enough Euros to know that is not true.
You're right, but the context of the discussion was around war games in particular. That was the conversation he was having. You're probably not wrong, but that is one thing that the role playing guys figured out 25, 30 years ago, right? The different ways in which you can learn wargaming rules. I mean, how long did it take for us to get around to ASL starter kits versus intro boxes for role playing games? You know, it's like a 30-year lag time there.
Yeah.
From the intro RPG set to the ASL starter kit or any other intro to a larger system or series kit out there, but in the context of war games in particular was the one Rodney was talking about. So
and certainly you see the digital world, or maybe whether it's corporate backed or whether it's just individual fanboys created content, things like the GMT Panzer series has some great little videos. Like they have like sort of 2 tank scenarios where they just highlight an aspect of how this situation works. Because you're right, you can only put so many examples of play in a rule book. I think there should be more examples of play, or you should have lots of them available, because inevitably those always come up. But when you talk about sort of doing this for the old school games, I wonder maybe if this is sort of where we're starting to run into not just having a faculty member who's in charge of the forward-thinking future of war game, but also have an archaeologist war gamer where they go, what do you think they meant by rule 24-7 supply lines? And then they have a conference of people sitting around trying to parse this. Well, no, but it only makes sense if you use it with that map. And it would be sort of like trying to figure out, sort of like the Rosetta tablet. It's like trying to decipher what those old languages were from the old rule books. So that would be a different faculty. That would be a different faculty within that same school.
It's like back in the day that when something like that would come up, you wrote your letter out, put a stamp on it, and sent it to Avalon Hill, and they would answer it in the next general, or they would send you an answer back.
Yeah. I'm imagining, Byron, the Dr. Byron, professor of wargame linguistics.
Yeah, with a big pipe sitting in with a tweed jacket with leather arm patches sitting there.
The Victorian study with the heavy wooden furniture and all the games on the shelf behind you. Yes. Not gonna lie, that does sound kind of cool. Yeah. So. The idea of, what would you improve? How would you improve it? Why would you improve it? I think there are a lot of folks that have different ideas of what we could do out there. And I'd be interested in hearing what the audience's take on some of this is also. So I would love to see, some of the comments, or pop into our forums. We've got a thread opened up on this over in the forum. So, we'd love to hear your ideas for if you had the $1 million and you couldn't just bank it and run off and fill your own personal study full of games. Although, Rocky, it's a great idea, right? Go support a whole bunch of game designers by buying their stuff. But what is it you would want to do for the hobby and how to do it? Mike's giant Dr. Seuss, Blue Panther Tron printing press machine. Look, you would be employing a whole bunch of graphics dudes as a part of that, just to go back and update all the graphics on some of these things, or a variety of technical people, even if you kept the graphics identical, just to do all of the technical setup as a part of the printing on all of these things. So I mean, that's still getting some folks in the hobby something to do, and a pathway into this. I will say it is a little surprising that nobody's mentioned that the greatest contribution they could make towards the wargaming hobby is just trying to get everybody to stop being assholes on social media to each other. So,
well, now you're just dreaming.
I know, and it's only $1 million. There's only so far you can get.
Yeah, we need a little bit more than $1 million for that.
Yeah, I mean, it is entertaining when the idea of an endowed faculty chair for war game instruction and an actual war game, a degree in war game development somehow is less fanciful than than the other ideas that you would come up with, but. I guess this is the world we're in, huh? Yeah. So,
Rob, I didn't say those two departments would get along. We have to figure out where the funding comes between them. Hey, I'm going to throw out one more question to the group, which is, what about and a big part, I think, gaming for me and hopefully everyone is the opportunity to get together with fellow gamers at conventions and things like that. Do we have enough game conventions or game nights at places where especially young people can go and see a game being played and maybe get introduced to it? I mean, the guys who are doing Magic and Pokemon, they seem to have figured that stuff out, right? I mean, Magic the Gathering produces MTG produces the Lord of the Rings and the One Ring sells for $1 million. Like, how does that happen over there? If one of us had just got the One Ring card from the MTG Lord of the Rings, that's how you would have solved that. That's where your funding model is. You just get, who's the rap star that bought it, or the hip hop guy that bought it. Yeah.
I have some thoughts, but I'd be curious to see what Rocky and Mike think. Rocky, what do you think?
That's an interesting proposition. You got your choice of, do you like go and support a large convention someplace and try to bring everyone together, go back to some of the old Origins or Gen Con type models, or do you come up with some sort of a competitive play or a more widespread small, go to support the stores, take some of that $1 million, invest in try to find the game or a series of games, something that can be played in an evening, a short evening, and set up a competitive play. I mean, X-Wing did it, but try to get into some of those models too. That's an interesting. It's another interesting approach, because you're still out there. You're still trying to evangelize for the hobby. You're still trying to bring in new players. You're still trying to support the publishers, because they got to keep pumping out new content, new material, and such. With as fickle as wargamers are, it may be that every year you got to bring out not just a new expansion pack, you got to bring out a whole new game, because it's last year's game isn't going to be good enough for this year. You always got to be trying to look for something new, something more than just updating the counters from Jack, or just bringing back the old game that we're all told is horrible because it's hex encounters and CRT from the past. Try to find that new thing. So that's an interesting suggestion there, Jack. I mean, how do you just $1 million to support the hobby? We've talked about bringing back the old games. We've talked about going academic forward. Some of it may just be getting some of that money into the hands of players, and supporting them through local play or convention play, so they can make them believers and make them part of the hobby.
The 12th season of Mentioned in Dispatches is made possible by all of our Patreon supporters who pledged at the top level. The Armchair Dragoons would like to thank Michael Sonneborg, Fred and his dog, Chet Bell, Hellcat6, Patrick Garrity, Stagger Wing, Kevin Bertram, Mike Quigley, Martok, and Joseph Nall for their support of the Regiment of Strategy Gaming, which helps us bring you the best strategy gaming articles, events, and this podcast. You can join us as a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/armchairdragoons.
Mike, what do you think before I jump in with my reaction to Byron's stuff here?
I like what Rocky said. I think, get out. You'd have to, in my mind, conventions are great, but I mean, you've seen it, Brand, at Origins we're there, and sometimes people will walk by and look at us like we're the visitors from Chernobyl and just kind of just walk around us as far as they can. I think really that if you could get out there locally, and introduce these games to, a lot of people have no idea what they hear war game and they think, oh, war is bad, and they just run away. And it's to get out there and show them the game. I think we have the games. I don't think you don't need to invent an introductory war game. I think we just need a better way of getting out there and showing it and showing people what it is and what we do and building up interest that way.
I think one of the reasons why you get some of the repeat engagement with the particular people you do for some of the things like the Star Wars X-Wing or the Magic the Gathering, the Pokemons, the Yu-Gi-Ohs, the collectible card games, as well as some of the skirmish minis games as well, is there is a a consistent refresh of the tools of the game itself. Many of those are collectible, if not collectible, at least sort of the living, air quotes around living, right? The living expansions where there are constant new pieces being brought out that are almost universally backwards compatible. The collectible nature of it does impact things a little bit with the card games or some of the blind minis games, but there's a constant refresh of material. Usually, it's going to be programmed to certain release schedules, but then the events are built around those release schedules. And I'm just not sure that we've got a whole lot of game systems out there other than ASL and maybe Commands and Colors that have enough of a constant churn, of a constant throughput of material to continually refresh that. Maybe, Commands and Colors could also include the Memoir 44 series. I just don't know that there's any publisher out there that has sufficient scale to constantly create the new content that is needed to continue to feed that event cycle that those guys, that the structured and organized play folks depend on to constantly keep people coming back to the table. Because I know locally, the Friday Night Magic, when you go see that at your friendly local game store, like every quarter there is a new set dropping from Hasbro/WotC of here's a new Magic the Gathering set. So here's the pre-release tournament, here's the new release tournament, here's the constructed deck league that we're going to play over the course of the next 6, 8, 10 weeks. Okay, here's the second run through the league, and then by the time all that you get through those 4 or 5 events, you're into the next quarter and the next new release is coming out. And at the risk of Rocky hanging up and never talking to me again, this is kind of where we were going with the system reference document, and maybe there's a common rule set that we can run off with and let a lot of people build off of off of a similar set and a similar licensing agreement that we talked with Chris Pramus about way back over a year ago now when Hasbro was doing all their OGL shenanigans. Maybe we need some sort of consistent, constant framework that we can run with for either a single publisher to have enough latitude to churn a whole lot of different content through, or that multiple publishers could be a part of that program. And I'll let Rocky go ahead and start cussing at me.
Well, I'm not going to cuss at you. It's just as we're talking here, I'm just thinking about, if we're trying to bring people in, as much as I love, tabletop wargaming, I think we've actually sort of danced around it a little bit tonight. The old tabletop war games, and the NATO counters, the lack of color palette, all those pieces have conspired against hobby wargaming over the years, that people just want to just it doesn't catch their eye. To somebody like myself, the old GEV, the black and white, printed on paper, that was great back in the day. But nowadays, especially in this era of social media, and I think this is what Jack was getting at, they want the bling. And if we're going to do that for the hobby wargaming space, I don't think it's going to necessarily be a tabletop war game. I think we're going to end up with something that's going to look almost like a miniatures piece.
Yeah.
And I was you got me thinking here, because we have some places on social media now, Little Wars TV that does their games and stuff. But I was doing some research for an article for you I'm writing there for the regiment. I came across a British TV show from the 1970s, late 70s, that had Dr. Paddy Griffith and others. Mm-hmm. It was a weekly show, Battleground, and it was miniatures.
Yeah,
and they just went off and fought the battles. Half-hour TV show. On regular TV, and it was spectacular looking, because they were doing it on the miniatures and miniatures tables and stuff. And they had that figured out back then, and if we did something like that now, maybe it is an ASL, maybe it's a bolt action, maybe it's something else in there with the miniatures. But I think what we'd find is that the miniatures rules many times can end up being simpler than some of these board games. Tabletop war games, and that may be helping to get the people in. I think it's been tried. We had the Axis and Allies, Ward C, and some others. They've tried it, and for various reasons, it hasn't always worked out. But with $1 million back in it, maybe we could make a difference.
Well,
I think though that.
Go ahead, Mike.
I was gonna say, I think so. Yeah, bling, I think, is part of it, but kind of going back to what Brant said, and with wargaming, we are limited by our content. So if you have something like Star Wars or Magic the Gathering, which is a good example, where, Magic the Gathering, you're going to have something new all the time because you're dealing with a fantasy universe and you can add an unlimited amount of stuff to it. So if you're in wargaming and I've got the Civil War, okay, GMT's U.S. Civil War, I can't come out next year and say, hey, we're going to do an expansion pack for U.S. Civil War, and you're going to have General Neo, and his special powers, he doesn't need supply. He can go anywhere on the map he wants to. And if you like that expansion, stay tuned for next year because we're going to have spaceships and go to the moon. It's you're limited with what you have. If you're doing a battle, you're doing a campaign, there's really no new information to introduce to that where the fantasy and the sci-fi games can do.
Well, yes and no. I mean, World War II was a pretty finite block of activity, and yet ASL has been living on that with how many ASL scenarios at this point? Obviously, the more you zoom in, the smaller scale you've got, the wider you can cast that net for individual scenarios and games and activities, because then you take the Battle of Kursk and you've broken it up into 78 different scenarios instead of just the one big battle of Kursk. But great battles, the American Civil War, great campaigns, the American Civil War, both of those series consistently continue to run. Part of the challenge you run into with some of those games is, Friday Night Magic, kid's going to come sit down with his deck and he's going to play 6 games in the 3 hours that he's there, that his parents drop him off or they're hanging out doing something else in the side while he's sitting down playing in that tournament, or sort of the organized role play kinds of things where, drop the kid off and she's playing, 4 encounters that night and then comes back next week and plays another 4 encounters because there's a consistent story, but you don't have to leave it set up on a table the whole time.
Yeah.
And so if you're going to run that extended OCS campaign, you might get a half a dozen people consistently show up and play, and, one new person each week that maybe eventually becomes a long-term player, but can the stores give up the space for those long-term games versus a repetitive set of micro games? Sounds bad because it's not just small footprint, but quick playing where you can play 2 and 3 and 5 and 6 in one night. That's a lot harder for us to pull off in the wargame world than some of those card guys or even some of the minis guys with something like a Star Wars Attack Wing where you've only got like 3 ships on the side or whatever.
Well, yeah, I think Rocky said it. If you want to do something like that with a war game to make it that fast and quick, it's probably not going to be a war game.
And tie it in with one of the favorite media licenses of all time with Star Wars. Byron, what you got?
I was going to say, well, first off, we're dealing with, there's been some great comments about the fact that, hey, there are some games that are based on an externally generated IP, Star Wars, Battlestar, all those kinds of great topics. And they have an inherent audience that's coming to that game because they're Star Wars or Star Trek guys. And they love that. World War II doesn't have an IP. There isn't, it's not a branded product where they have writers creating things. But having said that, why isn't there a Magic the Gathering equivalent, or an easier version of Upfront, which really is just a World War II version of a card game? Why don't we have an easier version of Upfront? That
there were attempts at several of them.
Yes,
you had Echelons of Fire, Echelons of Fury in the mid '90s. You had Last Crusade in the mid '90s. Since then, there's been 2 or 3 others. Honestly, you could reskin a lot of the Mech Warrior card game into some World War II stuff and not have to change a lot of the mechanics. Because a lot of the principles of warfare that were illustrated in that old card game still apply.
Or a World of Tanks, card game.
Yeah. So there was a World of Tanks card game at one point. Because Mike, were you there in 2014 with the very first Wargame HQ at Origins? I don't think you were there with us yet.
No.
So the World of Tanks dudes had something for one of the companies there had a licensed World of Tanks card game, and it was crap. It was essentially top trumps with World of Tanks artwork. It was dreadful, and it was funny because we took some pictures and sent them to a couple of the people we knew new over at the World of Tanks digital side, because we'd been in talks with them about maybe bringing a digital something to the Wargame HQ, and their reply was, "We've never heard of this in our lives." That was kind of funny that, the World of Tanks digital guys didn't even know the World of Tanks card game existed, which we found hilarious. But so yeah, a good World of Tanks card game, maybe. But the crap they tried in 2014, probably not so much. Rocky, what are you thinking?
Two things. Go support Ian Brown's Maneuver Warfare card game.
Oh, yeah,
I play tested it. Yeah, Deeds Foundation. And then second, maybe we need to take these $1 million. $1 million might not be enough, but let's go after that holy grail, that digital sand table, that virtual sand table that you can come in, you swipe, you set up, you hit save, and you walk away. I mean, I personally, I don't like screens and the digital. For me, I mean, partially I'm old and I don't have a giant screen in my office and everything, so it's hard for me to do gaming on a screen. But doing it on a flat tabletop with a virtual sand table or something like that, maybe we take our $1 million and we bring that one to help bring that one to fruition, so that we can get the tabletop world in the digital world and get the best of both.
Are you talking about something that actually kind of 3Difies itself, or are you just talking about taking the 80-inch TV and laying it flat and putting a touch screen on it?
Well, I'd have to hire that project manager with that $1 million and see what we can do. But no, I mean,
I think Byron was willing to be that PM for you.
6 figures, of course.
Yes, yeah.
Taking it and laying it flat, doing a little bit of a 3D. Again, we're almost getting into the miniatures world.
Yeah.
Because people just moving flat counters around on a flat surface are probably, okay, that's cute. But I mean, you see Jim with even just the tabletop simulator and what he's doing with the voxels and that sort of stuff, just bringing it even just in a 2D screen, but bringing the 3D effects into it, still is exciting, and people log in to watch it.
Yeah.
I think doing something for the hobby.
Some folks already have essentially the touch screen tabletop. I've seen them at different conventions here and there. I want to say somebody had one at Gamma Expo last year, but I don't remember for sure. I'll let you know in a couple of weeks if somebody's got one at Gamma Expo this year. But there's the idea of the flat touch screen that you can sort of poke and prod at. That's not necessarily new. What might be an interesting way to do it, rather than the advanced technology of 3Difying what comes out of that screen, maybe we go back to Byron's suggestion of blinging the game up a little bit, where the minis have some sort of distinguishing characteristic, whether it's an RFID chip or whatever the technology turns out to be, that the screen recognizes what the minis are and what they can do, and helps enforce the rules on you that way, but allows you to move stuff around a bit. Because I think that's definitely one place where the digital world has the tabletop world beat, is in learning the rules, if only through what it doesn't allow you to do. Right. I mean, there's nothing saying that you can't pick up that cavalry unit and just move them across the ocean on a tabletop game. You can't do that in a digital game. You can't do that in War and Peace digital or in a Civ game or something like that on the computer. So maybe that hybrid with the screen and the mini walking around on that touch screen helps bridge that gap for learning. And then the question becomes, how many of those consoles can you put in how many different games to help bring folks to learn in war games before they start complaining about why that touch screen won't play Catan for them. So
and there have been, I mean, we mentioned the collectible card games, the Pirates Constructible Strategy game by I think that was by Whiskers. That was actually quite popular at the time, for at least a couple of years. And it would be interesting, and there's no reason why you couldn't do a tanks constructible war game, or a World War I or World War II airplanes constructible war game, or something like that. And, you mentioned things like RFID chips. Hey, there you go.
The audience can't see me holding up a bunch of sealed packs of these on screen, but yeah, I've got a bunch of the Davy Jones curse still in the packs here that I got from a friend of mine when he passed away. I've got a whole bunch of these, some in packs, some opened up, but yeah, that's exactly the one you're saying. They actually had a Star Wars constructible strategy game for a while also.
They did. Yeah. And But there's no reason why you can't introduce something like an RFID chip into that tabletop gameplay. And whether it's a touchscreen or whether it's your phone or whether it's a device that you need to buy that, like the old Pop-O-Matic popper where you hit the button and it rolls the dice. And that little device senses how many ships are on the table, or tanks or airplanes or orcs or whatever you want, and it can sense where those things are because it's low range RFID, and turn something a little bit more automated rather than flipping through page, the rule books and stuff like that. So there certainly is new technology, I think, could certainly be leveraged in new ways that we haven't seen. That game U-Boat that came out 2 years ago. I think it was 2 years ago. I don't know if that worked, but it was certainly a step in the direction of figuring out what multimedia and tabletop gaming can look like.
It's been at least 3 years because it won the CSR 3 years ago for it won a bunch of CSRs, and source of much controversy when it happened a couple of years ago.
Best map in the game. Best map in a war game.
Yes.
U-Boat.
I do want to throw out one last idea. And I hadn't come prepared with this one. It was something one of y'all said that kind of made me think of it, even though you weren't mentioning this directly. A couple of years ago, there was a company that's based just outside of town here that I had interviewed with for a job with these guys, and they're actually in a whole lot of grocery stores around here, of all things. And I think the technology would be really cool to turn around and apply to the game business as a whole, but could certainly be micro targeted toward the war game business, depending on when and where and how you put this into place. But what they've got is essentially they've got some tablets on a loop in some different grocery stores in the beer and wine aisle, of all places, where they're usually near a lot of the local breweries displays there and the microbrews, where they're playing some stuff on a loop. Here's the story of our brewery. Here's some of the people that work here. Here's some of the things we do and how we do it. And it's an extended commercial on a loop, right? If you sat in the grocery store all day, I'm sure some of the employees that hate these things or have completely learned to tune them out because it's not anything more than about a 3 or 4 minute loop that just constantly goes all day long. But what if we had something similar to that showed some basic gameplay or explained what's in the game and what it does and how it does it, and we bolted these things onto the racks at some game stores. Again, these things are pretty tightly secured to their locations in grocery stores. I imagine we could figure out a way to lock them down in game stores, but something that was kind of playing on a loop as this interactive digital billboard that said, here are some of the games, here's what you're looking at, here's the kinds of things they cover. Let's watch a little bit of it in action. Let's see some of what's happening without us necessarily having to park a demo team in the game or in the store, semi-permanently in case somebody wanders by. That might be something that's a little off the wall, would certainly be expensive, would chew up a whole lot of our $1 million that we're talking about here. But maybe that's something that we could figure out a way to put in some stores. Again, like, you're not going to find war games in Target or Walmart, but you would find BattleTech in Target these days. There are far more hobby games in Target than I ever thought I would see in my lifetime at this point. Yeah. Between Seven Wonders and the 12 different flavors of Risk, but even things like Villainous and Munchkin, and again, some of the 40K Space Marine universe. You're now seeing some of those on the shelves in the mass market stores. How long before we could get a Twilight Struggle kind of war game adjacent something in there, and maybe start kind of kicking that door open bit by bit and use something like a digital interactive billboard as a tool for grabbing some interest? I don't know if it would work or not. Mike, what do you think?
I don't know. It may work. I mean, something like that, when we're at Origins would be helpful, right? You're running a game and you have that big video playing. Here's what we're doing and here's the basics of it. Maybe people would stop and watch that instead of watching us and learn something.
You saying they don't learn stuff from us?
No, we always say, go away, kid. I'm trying to run a game here. No, we do not do that at Origins.
Yeah. I mean, the challenge, of course, is like, we don't know if it would work, and the only way to find out is to spend a lot of money and hope. And you could spend a lot of money and find out it doesn't work. A lot of people would probably look at that as, well, you just wasted a bunch of money. Well, no, you did learn something valuable out of it. It just cost you a lot of money to do.
Yeah.
As
Or
David
maybe
is
not.
fond of saying, education can be expensive. Rocky, what do you think?
Or maybe not. I mean, I could see just all that we're talking about here is how do we make war games more attractive to people? How do we get them to make that initial stop and take a look and pick up a game and try to play? So I mean, even if you were just at the War Games headquarters and you had a large screen TV sitting there with a 3-minute loop just explaining the game while you guys are playing it, a little bit of the history of the game, a little bit of history of what the battle is or whatever it is, and then a little bit of a short explanation. As people walk by, they see you playing, but then they stop and they watch that 2-minute, 3-minute piece. That may be what gets them to come back. That may be what gets them to come through. So, I mean, how do we spend this $1 million to get people involved is what all this really the last hour has come down to. How do we get people to engage? Is it bring back the old for nostalgia? Is it bling it out? Make it more visually attractive? Is it try to create a academic pipeline to help people learn and engage with games better, or is it just simply spend money on a particular game or system to get them out there? All these choices are out there, but I'm just looking back in the last hour going like, all this has just come down to is how do we get people involved? And I'd love to say $1 million would help, but I mean it's probably needs a little bit more love than that.
Well, it won't hurt.
Keep it
I mean,
going.
let's. It won't. Well, just a second, Byron. I'm gonna throw this over to you in a second, but I just to react to what Rocky said. I mean, on one hand, there's the idea of taking that $1 million.
If I had $1 million, if I had
and trying to use it to heighten engagement with the general public. And there's two different ways you could there's two different paths you could take there. One path is to make some changes to what we do to potentially make it more attractive to the casual person cruising by. Another path might be to better explain what already exists in the hope of capturing somebody who might be interested in what's already there without the changes, but either doesn't know it exists or doesn't understand what they're looking at. So I think that's two different potential courses of action for broadening the participation pool. I think there's another course of action, and Mike, this might be a little bit of where you were going, which is catering to the existing people in the hobby by broadening their available choices. Because I'm not sure Mike's, the Blue Panthertron game reprinter, Omatic, that necessarily brings new players in, but it's great service for the existing players. Mm-hmm. I think is definitely a piece there. I think the academic suggestion that I was looking for was less servicing the existing community than trying to be a little more forward-looking and preserving and not necessarily codifying, because I don't want it to sort of become this overly rigid kind of thing, but sort of capturing and collecting what exists as well as the history of what's been there as some sort of record or service to the future of what we're looking at. They're all different kinds of engagement, but I'm not necessarily sure they're all focused on broadening the existing player pool. That's absolutely a valid course of action, but I'm not sure that's the only kinds of courses of action that we've described tonight. Why? Are they broken? Byron, I just ran off his monologue.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, I think one of the challenges really, and if you think about when each one of us got involved in the hobby and why we continue to remain involved in it, I think one of the questions you ultimately have to think about is how do you create a new nostalgia? How do you create those new memorable experiences for whoever wants to play, be they young or older, just new gamers? My wife has never played a war game. I would love to see her get into a game where she could talk about that experience. I mean, she has played Settlers of Catan. She's had a great time doing that. She enjoyed it. You know, how do you create that new nostalgia? How do you create that new awareness? You know, for $1 million, we might be able to get 5 minutes of Taylor Swift's time to play a board game. But and certainly that would help. But it's always it's the, you know, what are the kids doing? What are the kids thinking about? And you know, having an IP, having a compelling IP out there. I've seen personally, you know, I thought we saw a lot of kids getting engaged with fantasy when Lord of the Rings came out. We see a lot more kids getting interested in Frank Herbert with the Dune film series. So they're being able to leverage that. And we have to recognize the importance of media because, you know.
My daughter didn't give a rip about Dune until she found out Timothée Chalamet was in it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, let's face it, you know, we're all, yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if everyone has kids, but, you know, the truth about being a parent is that at age 13, your kid leaves you and they are raised by rock stars and movie stars. And that's really, you know, that's usually what happens. And finding a way to leverage whatever IP. I thought, I noticed on the YouTubes, I see a lot more stuff happening right now with, well, at least my YouTube feed with Masters of the Air. But I see a lot more content. And I see those actors showing up on TV shows, having interviews with talk show hosts, talking to where I'm sure there's young people watching those interviews and following up what they're doing and thinking, you know, well, I want to find out more about this because this actor's into it or that actor's into it. Hey, I mean, and I mentioned Magic the Gathering, that the One Ring card was bought by Post Malone. I mean,
yeah. Here's the Queen of the Skies game. You know, let's have a chance to play your own mission through Masters of the Air.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, like the people who are best positioned to do a legit historical look at something like that are the ones with the least financial ability to go get that license and, you know, attach it to an existing game that probably comes narratively pretty close to what those guys are dealing with in the shows.
Yeah. And there's always going to be a difficult point. Like, I mean, you know, you can't really do a Saving Private Ryan game. You know, I mean, I know we've all played Normandy games. We've all played, you know, that genre and that era. But to link a board game or a product or a miniature series with that movie would be, I mean, it all bordering on crass, right? I mean, and entering into a realm of
that hasn't stopped people from necessarily kind of trying, because if you go back and look at a lot of the original Company of Heroes launch graphics, they very much look like the screens from Saving Private Ryan, the video game. You know, if this one existed, they everything but the name of the movie slapped on it.
Yeah. Video might be different. So.
Yeah. But you're bringing up an interesting point, I think, though, is that, and, you know, and we probably all have the same sort of background. I think to get into wargaming, I think if you have a love for history first, then it's much easier to get into wargaming. And the kind of things you're talking about now, you know, the big flashy Saving Private Ryan, those people aren't really so much interested in history as they are, Saving Private Ryan, the video game. Hey, I'm going to play that because I can run around and shoot people. And just, it's not so much about the D-Day landing or history, just it's an action game at this point.
Yeah.
So the question is, you know, how many young people today are interested in history enough first? So there, I think, is a good measuring stick for here's your base group of people you can appeal to play war games. I bet it's pretty small. I don't think there's, I don't know how people are interested in history these days, but I bet it's a pretty small number, which is sad, but true.
Yeah, I definitely think that's been dwindling over the years. But Mike, you may be onto something. Maybe part of this is the approach is in who you're trying to bring into that discussion. And look, these are all a variety of topics that are absolutely worthy, probably of their own show, each in and of themselves. You know, kind of wanted to with this particular episode grab the inspiration from BGG and widen it a little bit from the original question that the guy was asking on there. But to talk about, all right, here's some money, let's go do some cool stuff for wargaming. What would we do and how would we do it? I think we've covered a lot of ground tonight.
Yeah.
We tend to do that, on this show and ramble around quite a bit. But I do think it comes back to there are a couple of courses of action to pursue, none of which are right. It's just a matter of kind of personal preference of what you think might work to suit what it is you think the hobby should be doing, whether it's trying to engage new members of it or do better by the people already in it, or sort of a future looking thing, or maybe we're just trying to find some favorite toys to go play with. I can't imagine improving the copy editing hurts any of those courses of action. So damn it, we'll get some editors because Lord knows we need those guys. Folks, we're a little past an hour as we're recording. Again, upon editing, we're going to lose at least 5 to 10 minutes of this, if only because I edit out us saying over and over. So, Byron, thank you very much for taking the time out of your vacation to join us for this first episode that you're here with us for. So I do appreciate you knocking off from the slopes a few minutes early and holding off on the beer until we were able to get through this.
Oh, I didn't say anything about knocking off beer.
I was going to say, I'm not so sure he did that.
Yeah,
and it's totally cool if you didn't. Like, you wouldn't be the first person to.
I was working on a Canadian mule. I was working on a Canadian mule here. It's ginger beer and Canadian whiskey.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. We've been known to have a slightly sloshed member or two on the podcast over the years. I'm sure Mike remembers a few of them, though probably not the ones he was on.
He might have been a few of them too. Who knows?
Yeah. So, Rocky, thank you for taking the time to be here. Do appreciate it. You're definitely coming back later this season, and we've got plenty of other ground to cover. And Mike, thank you for being a diligent co-host and making it a couple of weeks in a row.
Yep, no problem.
And an audience, especially thank you to you guys. We don't have a show. Well, I mean, we have a show without you guys, but it's sort of pointless. So we absolutely appreciate the time you spend with us, hanging out here with us on Mentioned in Dispatches. We'll catch you next time on episode 5. We're all the way up to episode 5 next week. So we're looking forward to you guys coming back and spending another hour or so with us, walking the dog, painting some minis, cussing at us while you're listening to us on the podcast, whatever it might be. Thanks for making the time to listen to us here on Mentioned in Dispatches.